A forgotten voice from history is speaking, one that could change everything we thought we knew about Jesus. What was once dismissed as just another ancient scroll has surfaced, and its content is nothing short of shocking. Claudia Procula, the wife of Pontius Pilate, left behind a testimony, rare, detailed, and deeply unsettling. She wasn't just a bystander. She was there, inside the Roman palace, living through the trial that shook the world. While the crowd screamed for crucifixion, Claudia saw something others didn't, something she would never forget. But who was she? Married to the Roman governor of Judea, Claudia was elegant, quiet, and observant. While Pilate navigated political chaos, she moved silently behind the scenes, hearing whispers, reading faces, sensing the tension building in Jerusalem. And then came Jesus. Unlike others in her circle who mocked him, Claudia couldn't brush it off. The more she heard about his miracles, his words, his eyes, the more something inside her stirred. Restlessness, wonder, fear. She didn't know it yet, but she was being drawn into a divine story, one that would change her forever. Don't miss what happens next. Hit subscribe, because the truth she saw is more powerful than anyone ever imagined. Claudia Procula lived in quiet conflict, torn between the pride of her Roman heritage and the mystery surrounding the man from Nazareth. With each day, as rumors swirled and tension mounted, she felt it deep in her soul. Her husband, Pontius Pilate, would soon face a moment that would change history. How could someone who taught love, healed the sick, and preached peace be treated like a criminal? The thought haunted her. Though she lived in luxury, Claudia was no stranger to discomfort. As Pilate's wife, she witnessed firsthand the cruelty used to keep order in Judea. She saw the unrest, the blood in the streets, the cries of the oppressed, and none of it sat right with her. The more she observed, the clearer it became. Rome wasn't just suppressing rebellion. It was trying to silence something holy, something eternal, and Jesus stood at the center of it all. While Pilate feared losing control, Claudia feared something deeper, that they were about to destroy someone sent by God. Her unease turned to dread. Then one night, the dream came. It felt too vivid to be imagined. She saw Jesus, bathed in a light that didn't belong to this world. He walked calmly, eyes forward, as if fully aware of the pain ahead. And yet, he didn't resist. He carried something divine. Claudia awoke in terror, her heart pounding, her spirit shaken. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. Pilate must not touch that man. Claudia awoke in a cold sweat, heart pounding, breath short, still haunted by the image of Jesus in her dream. His eyes, they had pierced through her soul, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something catastrophic was near. Normally, she dismissed her visions, but not this time. This one felt like a warning from heaven itself. Overwhelmed by dread, Claudia rushed to Pilate. Her voice trembled, her eyes wide with fear. She begged him, pleaded, to have nothing to do with the condemnation of Jesus. This wasn't just politics. This wasn't religion. It was something far greater, something sacred. She told him everything: the light, the silence, the sorrow etched on Jesus's face. She described the anguish that had wrapped itself around her spirit like a storm. But Pilate, ever the pragmatist, brushed it off as nothing more than a troubling dream, a coincidence, a woman's imagination. He offered her cold comfort. But Claudia knew, if Jesus was condemned, something irreversible would be set in motion, and it would haunt them forever. Despite knowing she risked her position, her influence, even her husband's trust, she couldn't stay silent. The fear of watching injustice unfold before her eyes was greater than the fear of losing everything else. So once more, with a quiet but determined voice, she confronted Pilate. "This man is innocent," she whispered. "There's more at stake than you realize. Please, don't be the one to do this." But deep down, she already knew. The decision had been made, and the nightmare was just beginning. Claudia pleaded with Pilate one last time. "Don't let the empire bear the stain of condemning someone so pure," she begged. "This man is unlike any other who's walked our land." But Pilate remained unmoved, cold, calculating. To him, Claudia's fears were rooted in superstition, emotions clouding reason. He couldn't afford such softness. The governor of Judea had to appear strong, decisive, especially now, with the religious leaders demanding blood and the people on the verge of revolt. Claudia saw it in his eyes, the iron resolve he had to wear like armor. Still, she tried again, just once more. "Reflect," she whispered, "before it's too late." But her words bounced off the wall of duty that now surrounded him. And then the day came. A heavy shadow fell over Jerusalem. Claudia felt it before she even opened her eyes. A sense of dread so thick it suffocated her breath. Outside the palace, the streets boiled with chaos. Shouts, chants, a storm of voices demanding justice or vengeance. From her place in the background, Claudia watched the scene unfold. Her heart pounded as she saw her husband walk toward the tribunal. His face was pale, drawn, bearing the weight of a decision no man should have to make. The crowd roared outside. Inside, accusations rang like hammers on stone. Miracles, blasphemy, rebellion. Claudia listened in fragments, but each word was like a dagger. They weren't just condemning Jesus. They were sealing the fate of something sacred, something eternal. She knew Pilate didn't want to give in, but she also knew he couldn't afford a riot. The voices of the priests, the demands of the people. They were louder than truth. For a brief moment, she hoped he might choose mercy. But when she heard the cries rising again, "Crucify him!" her hope shattered. The verdict was no longer Pilate's. It belonged to the mob. And so, Claudia stood in silence, watching history break under the weight of fear and pride. Claudia stood frozen, her heart racing, her breath shallow, as the weight of reality sank in. Her desperate plea from the night before had changed nothing. Pilate was caught, between the iron grip of Rome and the roar of the people. And now the trial was slipping beyond his control. She couldn't bear to watch the rest. Every word of accusation, every cry for condemnation felt like a dagger twisting deeper into her soul. Unable to endure the horror unfolding before her, Claudia withdrew, her heart heavy with the certainty that the tragedy she had feared was now inevitable. Yet even from a distance, she felt the atmosphere shift. The voices outside grew louder, more frenzied. The courtroom trembled with tension as demands for death filled the air. Claudia watched Pilate closely. The man who once carried himself with composure now looked weary, conflicted, his face etched with doubt. His eyes betrayed a torment he couldn't hide. He tried to reason with the crowd, to offer an alternative, but his words were drowned in fury. The priests, unrelenting, pressed harder for Jesus' execution. Behind Pilate's mask of authority, Claudia saw something raw, a man crumbling beneath the weight of a decision he did not want to make. There would be no justice today. The crowd would accept no delay, no compromise. Mercy had no voice in that place. And Claudia, once bold, once defiant, now felt her own voice silenced, buried beneath the noise of the mob. Then, the moment came. Pilate took a basin. He dipped his hands into water. Slowly, he washed them clean before the people. Claudia felt a chill run through her entire body. That simple gesture spoke louder than any sentence. He was surrendering, not just to the will of the crowd, but to something darker: fear, self-preservation, and silence. And though his hands were now clean, Claudia knew his soul was not, because deep down, Pilate understood, just as she did, that what had just happened could never be undone. As the verdict echoed through the halls, Claudia felt time stop. This was the moment she had feared. The final chance to stop the unthinkable was gone. And now, all that remained was silence and the weight of regret. She returned to her chambers, but the palace no longer felt like home. Once grand and full of dignity, it now felt lifeless, like a tomb. The air was thick with something she couldn't describe, a haunting quiet, as if Jerusalem itself was holding its breath, swallowed by a sorrow too deep for words. She watched Pilate retreat into himself, silent, stoic, broken. Though he had washed his hands before the crowd, Claudia knew the gesture meant nothing. His soul remained stained by the decision he couldn't escape. And in his eyes, she saw what he wouldn't say aloud: doubt, guilt, and the crushing knowledge that no water could ever cleanse what had been done. For Claudia, the emptiness was deeper still. The image of Jesus, serene, silent, dignified, would not leave her mind. His calmness in the face of hate, his quiet strength under pressure, it haunted her. The nightmare she had once dismissed now seemed like prophecy, and all she could do was wait and watch. The palace had grown unnaturally still. The voices of the crowd screaming for crucifixion still echoed in her mind. Every sound, every memory carved itself into her spirit. She realized that neither she nor Pilate would ever escape this day. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Then came the whispers. Jesus was being taken away, to be tortured. The words hit her like a blade. She had only seen him once, but his presence was unforgettable. Now that same man was in the hands of brutal soldiers, mocked, humiliated, crowned with thorns. They treated him like a criminal, but all he had ever spoken of was love, peace, forgiveness. Claudia couldn't understand it. How could the world be so blind to the truth? How could power crush purity so easily? And though she was powerless to stop it, she felt every lash, every insult, every thorn, as if the suffering of that man was tearing through her own soul. Claudia could hardly understand how a man who had spoken nothing but truth and love could be met with such cruelty. Each new report, another beating, another insult, felt like a stone pressing heavier on her chest. Guilt wrapped itself around her like a shroud, and with every passing hour, the world around her seemed to descend deeper into an unrelenting darkness. Her dream, her intuition, even the anguish in her soul, they had all been warnings. Something far beyond human control was unfolding. She felt revulsion for what was happening. But beneath the horror, a strange pull, painful and sacred, compelled her to know more. It was as if his suffering was part of a divine mystery, a purpose too vast for words. Claudia began to understand her place in it all. She was not a protector, not an influencer of fate. She was a witness, powerless between the brute force of Rome and the silent gravity of Jesus. And then it happened. In a brief and unexpected moment, her eyes met his. That gaze, quiet, clear, eternal, pierced through her. Jesus looked at her with a serenity that defied logic, with a depth that saw past everything. In those few seconds, Claudia felt something she had never known before, an overwhelming compassion, a silent strength, and a knowledge that needed no words. He didn't look at her like a prisoner, nor a man awaiting death. He looked at her as if he knew her soul, and had already forgiven it. The moment passed quickly, but it left a mark she couldn't explain. That gaze followed her, through corridors, through silence, through prayer. Wherever she turned, it remained with her, like a light shining in the middle of her shame. Claudia had never seen peace like that, especially in someone staring straight into the face of death. It disturbed her deeply, and yet it also gave her hope. For the first time, she saw something that reached beyond Rome, beyond reason, beyond even herself. She wished desperately that Pilate had listened, that he had stopped it all. But it was too late. All she had left was the memory of that moment, a gaze that changed everything, a memory she would carry, not as a mark of guilt, but as the beginning of something sacred inside her. When the day of the crucifixion arrived, Claudia Procula stood on the edge of despair. From the earliest light of morning, a deep and suffocating anguish gripped her chest. It felt as though her soul was unraveling, torn by something far greater than grief. She had heard the sentence: Jesus was to carry his own cross to Golgotha. And with each report, her dread grew heavier. She couldn't bring herself to follow the procession, but her thoughts wouldn't let her go. It was as if she could feel every moment of his suffering, every stumble on the stones of the Via Dolorosa, every lash of the whip, every jeer from the crowd. Claudia sensed it all in her bones. She knew this was the end. An innocent man was walking to his death, and she could do nothing to stop it. Retreating to a quiet corner of the palace, Claudia tried to steady herself, to pray, to breathe, to silence the storm inside her. But the images flooded her mind. Jesus, nailed to a cross, suspended above the earth, suffering not just from the pain, but from the cruelty of a world that had rejected him. Some would look at him with scorn, others perhaps with sorrow, but none would truly understand, not even she. And yet, she wept. When word reached her that Jesus had been raised on the cross, something inside Claudia broke. The pain she felt was invisible but sharp, as if a blade had passed through her spirit. She had never fully understood who he was, but she knew, deep down, that this man carried a sacred burden. And now he was exposed, alone, bleeding under a sun that had witnessed too much. Claudia realized then that she would never be the same. This wasn't just the death of an innocent. It felt like the extinguishing of something divine. Hope itself, crucified. That day would never leave her, not in her dreams, not in her silence, not in the years to come. When she remembered Jesus, the image was vivid and unshakable. Not majestic in the way the Romans revered power, but striking in a quiet, defiant way. He had dark skin, weathered by sun and time, the face of a man who walked among the people, not above them. His presence defied every expectation she had held. He was not a figure of legend or myth, but of truth, living, breathing, suffering, and now, dying. Claudia would carry the weight of that image for the rest of her life. Not just of a man crucified, but of a light the world had failed to recognize before it was too late. Though he walked among the people, blending into the crowd with ease, Jesus carried a presence that was anything but ordinary. Claudia saw it the moment she truly looked at him. His features were rugged, sun-worn, marked by labor, simplicity, and life among the common folk. He had no air of royalty, no signs of wealth or power. His hair was dark, slightly wavy, unkempt from the wind and the dust of the streets. It framed his face gently, adding to the quiet dignity he seemed to carry without effort. And then, there were his eyes. Brown, deep, and unyielding. When Claudia looked into them, it felt like falling into a sea of unspoken truth. There was a compassion there, piercing and profound. It was as if he saw everything, and still loved what he saw. In that gaze, she felt her doubts unravel, her beliefs tremble. His eyes held a peace that made her question the entire world she had come from. His beard, trimmed but not styled, gave him a resolute look, soft but strong. There was no pretense, no vanity, just raw humanity, worn like a robe of humility. Unlike the severe, authoritative faces of Roman leaders, his expression was open, welcoming, steady. Claudia realized then that his beauty wasn't found in form, it was in presence. He radiated something invisible but undeniable, a sacred strength, a quiet power. It wasn't his appearance that changed her, it was his essence. To the world, he looked like an ordinary man, but to Claudia, he now represented something eternal. As the trial began, Claudia stood tense, her breath shallow, her hands clenched. The scene was both solemn and chaotic. Jesus stood still, accused by priests and leaders who hurled charges of blasphemy and rebellion with venomous passion. Yet amid their shouting and theatrical gestures, he said nothing. He didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. Claudia couldn't understand it, but she could feel it. His silence was not weakness, it was power. He stood as though he already knew the outcome, as if all of this, every insult, every lie, was part of a plan far greater than any of them could grasp. She turned her gaze to Pilate. He looked pale, tense, unlike himself. Claudia had seen him rule with clarity and control. But now, something had shifted. Every word he spoke, every glance toward Jesus, every attempt to calm the storm around him, revealed a man slowly unraveling. Claudia knew her husband, and she knew that in this moment, he wasn't just facing political pressure. He was facing something spiritual, something eternal, and he didn't know what to do with it. Pilate stood before the crowd, visibly torn, his voice unsteady as he asked, "What should I do with this man called Jesus?" The reply came like thunder, "Crucify him." The word struck Claudia like a blade. She had feared this moment, prayed it wouldn't come, but now it was here, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her heart ached with a pain that felt physical, like her soul was being crushed under the weight of injustice. And yet, Jesus remained still. He didn't argue, he didn't plead, he didn't even flinch. His silence spoke louder than any defense. His gaze, serene and steady, seemed to accept what lay ahead. Not with defeat, but with purpose. It was as if he had already made peace with his fate. For Claudia, the moment was unbearable and unforgettable. She had never seen such peace in the face of such cruelty. His calm shattered everything she thought she knew about justice, power, and strength. The image of Jesus standing there, condemned yet unwavering, etched itself into her memory like a sacred wound. When she heard he was being led to Golgotha, her spirit collapsed into despair. She couldn't follow, but in her mind, she walked every step beside him. She imagined the weight of the cross, the lashes still fresh on his back, the jeering crowd, the nails, the pain. And through it all, she saw his face, calm, bruised, yet full of something she couldn't name, something holy. The distance didn't matter. She felt his agony as if it were her own. News reached the palace slowly, each word heavier than the last. He had been nailed to the cross, lifted high above the crowd, mocked, bleeding, gasping under the burning sky. Claudia could hardly breathe. How could the same man, who once stood in peace and power, now hang broken, tortured by the very world he came to save? She tried to pray. She whispered to the Roman gods for clarity, for comfort, for anything. But her prayers fell into silence, as if the heavens themselves had turned away. She felt abandoned, useless, crushed beneath the burden of guilt she could no longer ignore. She had failed to stop it, and now, she could only watch as the last breath of an innocent man was stolen by hate. Then, the skies began to darken, and the earth, they said, began to tremble. Claudia knew this was no ordinary death, and this was no ordinary man. Claudia watched the sky darken. She felt the earth tremble beneath her feet. It was as if nature itself was crying out, refusing to stay silent in the face of what had just happened. In her heart, she knew. This was no ordinary death. This was the turning of an age. The crucifixion of Jesus wasn't simply a punishment. It was a moment that tore history in two. For Claudia, Golgotha wasn't just a hill. It was holy ground, the place where something inside her broke and something deeper began to awaken. In the days that followed, she withdrew into silence. No words could capture what she had witnessed. She was not the same, and she knew she never would be again. But then, the rumors began. Whispers spread through the streets of Jerusalem. He had risen. Jesus, alive. At first, Claudia didn't believe it. How could she? Resurrection defied logic. It shattered reason. She assumed it was nothing more than desperate hope from heartbroken followers. But the story would not go away. The voices grew louder. Testimonies emerged, not just from his disciples, but from soldiers, and even those within the Roman court. The tomb had been sealed, guarded, and yet, his body was gone. The more she heard, the more her heart trembled, not with fear, but with awe. The dream, the silence, his gaze, his peace in the face of death. It all returned to her like a prophecy fulfilled. And in that moment, Claudia saw it clearly. This was not just a man. This was the divine, alive, victorious, unstoppable. If Jesus had truly risen, then every word he spoke was truth. Every act of love, every message of peace, every promise of hope, eternal ease. Every promise of... She felt as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. Everything looked different now. Her faith, once shaped by empire and ritual, had been shattered and rebuilt on something deeper. A truth that could not be unlearned. A miracle she would carry forever. From that moment on, Claudia Procula lived with the unshakable knowledge that she had witnessed the most sacred event in all of history. The resurrection of Jesus Christ had changed the world, and it had changed her. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. Click on the video now appearing on your screen to discover more powerful stories that history almost forgot, but heaven never did.